Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Alexander Bates stood in his study, the weight of 23 years of marriage crumbling around him like ancient mortar. The private investigator's photographs lay scattered across his mahogany desk. His wife, Alexandra Bradshaw Bates, in the arms of another man, their bodies intertwined in what had once been his sacred matrimonial bed. Alexander had built his life with military precision. A former Marine Corps Force reconnaissance operative, he transitioned into private security consulting, building an empire that protected corporate executives and government officials across 3 continents. His company, Bates Strategic Solutions, was worth $47 million. Every penny earned through blood, sweat, and an unwavering code of loyalty. The same code Alexandra had shattered. He studied the photographs with the cold detachment that had once helped him survive 3 tours in Afghanistan. The man defiling his bed was Roman Thornton, a real estate developer who'd been circling their social circle like a vulture for months. Alexander remembered the charity galas where Roman would hover near Alexandra, complimenting her emerald dress, her sapphire earrings, gifts Alexander had given her for missions in countries most people couldn't find on a map. What twisted the knife deeper wasn't just the affair. The investigator had uncovered something far more sinister. Roman wasn't just sleeping with Alexandra. He was systematically positioning himself to inherit everything Alexander had built. Marriage certificates hidden in a safety deposit box under false names. Property transfers being prepared. Even his elderly mother's estate documents had been tampered with. They weren't just stealing his wife. They were stealing his life. Alexander's phone buzzed. A text from Alexandra. Working late at the gallery again. Don't wait up. Love you. The gallery she'd supposedly been managing for the past 6 months. Another lie. The building had been sold 4 months ago. She'd been spending her evenings in Roman's penthouse, planning Alexander's destruction while he worked 18-hour days to provide for a marriage that existed only in his mind. His fingers traced the edges of his father's service revolver, locked in the desk drawer beside a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. Jerome Bates had taught his son 2 things before dying in Vietnam. Honor your commitments, and never let anyone make you a fool twice. Alexander was about to honor both lessons. His computer chimed with an encrypted email from his head of intelligence, Garrett Whitehead. The subject line read, "Package contents verified." Inside were financial records showing Roman's recent business acquisitions, including the building that housed Alexander's mother's assisted living facility. The same facility where Dorothy Bates, 83 years old and suffering from early-stage dementia, lived in what she believed was secure independence. The plan crystallized in Alexander's mind with the clarity of a sniper's scope. They want to play games with family loyalty? He'd show them what loyalty really meant. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's facility. "Mr. Bates? This is the night supervisor. Your mother is asking for you. She seems agitated." Alexander's blood turned to ice. What kind of agitated? She keeps saying someone was in her room. Someone who made her sign papers. She's asking for you to come get her. The pieces fell into place like dominoes. Roman wasn't just planning to steal Alexander's assets. He was already moving against the most vulnerable member of his family. Alexander locked the photographs in his safe, chambered a round in his father's revolver, and walked toward the door. Whatever game Roman and Alexandra thought they were playing, they just made it personal. And Alexander Bates had never lost a war. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The drive to Sunset Manor took Alexander through the heart of the city he'd sworn to protect. Neon lights blurred past his windshield as he mentally cataloged every asset, every contact, every favor owed to him in 2 decades of private security work. Roman Thornton had made a fatal error. He'd underestimated the difference between a businessman and a warrior. Alexander's phone rang as he pulled into the facility's parking lot. His mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Alex, is that really you?" "I'm here, Mom. Tell me what happened." That man, the one who was always so friendly at the church fundraisers. "Roman something. He came tonight with papers. Said he bought the building. Said I had to sign transfer documents for my apartment. When I refused, Her voice broke. "He said terrible things about you. Said you didn't care about me, that you were too busy with your war games to be a real son. Alexander's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Mom, listen to me carefully. Go to your bedroom. Lock the door. I'm coming to get you. He said I'm in a state facility. One of those places where they warehouse old people until they die. He laughed, Alex. He laughed and said, your son is useless. He's not coming for you. The line went dead. Alexander stared at his phone, then at the building where his mother, a woman who'd raised him alone after his father's death, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through military school, was being terrorized by a predator who thought Alexander was too civilized to fight back. He opened his glove compartment and removed a device that looked like a standard GPS unit. In reality, it was a tactical communications array that connected him to every operative in his network. He pressed a sequence of buttons and spoke a single word, Reaper. Within 30 seconds, his phone buzzed with confirmations from 12 different operatives across the city. Garrett Whitehead, his intelligence chief. Clayton Hickman, his demolitions expert. Raphael Merritt, his surveillance specialist. Men who'd followed him through hellholes across 3 continents, who'd trust him with their lives because he'd already proven worthy of that trust. Garrett, I need everything on Roman Thornton. Financial records, property holdings, personal habits, family connections. I need it in 4 hours. Copy that. What's the threat assessment? Maximum. He's made a move against my mother. The silence on the other end told Alexander everything he needed to know. His team understood that crossing certain lines meant entering a different kind of warfare, the kind where rules of engagement didn't apply. Clayton, I need you to visit the Sunset Manor security office. Disable their camera system for the next 2 hours. Make it look like routine maintenance. Roger. What about witnesses? Handle them quietly. Alexander ended the call and walked toward the building. The night's supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Cheryl Lee, met him at the front desk. Mr. Bates, thank God you're here. Your mother has been so upset. That man who visited earlier, he said he had legal authority, but something felt wrong. Show me the papers he had her sign. Cheryl hesitated. He took them with him, said they needed to be filed immediately. Alexander studied her face, reading the micro-expressions that revealed she was holding something back. What else? He left something. A business card. Said you should call him when you came to your senses about the family situation. The card was expensive, embossed lettering on heavy stock. Roman Thornton, senior partner, Thornton Development Group. Below the standard contact information was a handwritten note. Alex, some things are bigger than your pride. Call me. We need to talk. RT. Alexander pocketed the card and headed toward his mother's room. The hallways of Sunset Manor were quiet, filled with the soft breathing of elderly residents who trusted that their families would protect them from predators like Roman Thornton. He found his mother sitting on her bed, still in her nightgown, clutching a framed photograph of Alexander in his dress blues. Her hands shook as she looked up at him. He said you wouldn't come, she whispered. He said I was a burden you'd be happy to get rid of. Alexander knelt beside her bed and took her hands. They were cold, fragile, spotted with age. The same hands that had bandaged his childhood scrapes, that had waved him off to war, that had applauded at his wedding to a woman who was now plotting to destroy everything he'd built. Mom, listen to me. No one is going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. And anyone who threatens you is going to answer to me personally. Dorothy Bates looked into her son's eyes and saw something that made her relax for the first time in hours. It was the same look he'd had as a boy when neighborhood bullies tried to steal his lunch money. A cold, calculating fury that promised consequences. What are you going to do, Alex? Alexander helped her into her robe and began packing her essentials into a small suitcase. I'm going to remind some people why it's dangerous to mistake kindness for weakness. As they left Sunset Manor together, Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your mother is safe for now, but she's just the beginning. If you want to discuss terms, meet me at the Riverside Marina, slip 47. Come alone. You have 1 hour. RT. Alexander looked at his mother, sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat of his car. Then at the message that confirmed Roman Thornton had just escalated from theft to kidnapping threats. He typed back, on my way. But Roman had made one crucial miscalculation. Alexander Bates never came alone to anything. Chapter 3. Lines in Sand. The Riverside Marina at midnight was a maze of shadows and reflected moonlight. Alexander parked his car in a position that gave him 3 separate escape routes, then spent 5 minutes observing the area through night vision binoculars. Roman's yacht, a 60-foot azimuth named Second Chances, was moored at Slip 47, its lights creating a pool of false warmth in the darkness. Alexander counted 4 figures on the deck, Roman plus 3 companions whose positioning suggested security training. Professional, but not military. Corporate muscle, the kind who relied on intimidation rather than actual combat experience. His earpiece crackled with Garrett's voice, Overwatch in position. Clayton has eyes on their vehicle access. Raphael is monitoring communications. You're covered, boss. Alexander adjusted his concealed body armor and checked the tactical knife strapped to his forearm. His father's revolver rested in a shoulder holster, but he hoped the situation wouldn't require that level of escalation. Yet, Roman Thornton stood at the yacht's stern, wearing a casual polo shirt and khakis that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Even at 52, he maintained the kind of artificially perfect appearance that came from expensive personal trainers and cosmetic procedures. His smile was the same one Alexander had seen at charity events, confident, predatory, practiced. Alex, thanks for coming. I was hoping we could resolve this like civilized men. Alexander stepped onto the yacht's deck, noting the positions of Roman's 3 associates. 2 flanking the main cabin entrance, 1 position near the bow. Standard intimidation formation. You threatened my mother. There's nothing civilized about that. Roman's smile never wavered. Threatened? Alex, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I simply informed Dorothy about some upcoming changes in her living situation. Changes that could be beneficial for everyone involved. Explain. Roman gestured toward the yacht's luxurious interior. Your mother's facility is being renovated. Extensive renovations that will require residents to relocate temporarily. I've arranged alternative accommodations, very nice ones, actually. State-of-the-art medical care, recreational facilities, social programs designed specifically for seniors with cognitive challenges. Alexander's expression remained neutral, but his hand shifted slightly closer to his concealed weapon. And the papers you forced her to sign? Power of attorney documents. Completely standard for families dealing with elderly parents who can no longer make complex decisions independently. Alexandra thought. Alexandra. The name hung in the air like a blade. Roman's smile flickered for the first time. Your wife is naturally concerned about Dorothy's well-being. We've been discussing the best options for her care. Alexandra feels that perhaps you've been too emotionally involved to make objective decisions about your mother's needs. Alexander processed this information with the cold calculation of a sniper acquiring targets. Alexandra wasn't just having an affair. She was actively participating in the systematic destruction of his family. Where's my wife now, Roman? Safe. Comfortable. Making some very important decisions about her future. Our future, you mean? Roman's smile returned, but now it carried the sharp edge of a man who believed he held all the cards. Alex, let's be honest about the situation. Your marriage has been over for months. Alexandra is filing for divorce next week. The community property settlement will be substantial. Your mother's care needs are becoming more expensive every day. Your business, while successful, carries significant debts and overhead costs that could be problematic during a prolonged legal battle. Alexander stepped closer, noting how Roman's security team tensed. And you're offering to solve all these problems? I'm offering to make this transition as painless as possible for everyone involved. Alexandra gets her freedom and financial security. Your mother gets the specialized care she deserves. And you, Roman paused dramatically, you get to walk away with your dignity intact and enough liquid assets to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere else. Your skill set is valuable, Alex. There are opportunities in private security across the globe. South America, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia. Places where a man with your experience could build something new, something that doesn't carry the emotional baggage of failed relationships. Alexander understood now. This wasn't just theft, it was exile. Roman wanted him gone, removed from the equation entirely, so he could inherit everything Alexander had built without the inconvenience of ongoing legal complications. And if I refuse? Roman's smile disappeared entirely. Then things become more complicated. Your mother's medical condition could deteriorate rapidly without proper care. Your business could face regulatory scrutiny. The private security industry has so many compliance requirements, and overlooked violations can be very expensive. Your wife could make allegations about domestic situations that would be damaging to your reputation and professional credibility. The threats were delivered with the casual confidence of a man who'd clearly done this before. Alexander realized he was looking at a predator who specialized in systematically destroying families and absorbing their assets. I need time to consider your offer. Of course, take all the time you need, but understand that some opportunities have expiration dates. Dorothy's current housing situation becomes untenable after this weekend. Alexandra's divorce filing deadline is Monday morning. And certain business irregularities I've discovered in your corporate structure should probably be addressed before they attract unwanted attention. Alexander nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitability of Roman's ultimatum. I'll be in touch. As he turned to leave, Roman called out, Alex, one more thing. Your father was a good soldier, I'm sure. But this isn't a war zone. This is business. The sooner you understand the distinction, the easier this process will be for everyone. Alexander paused at the yacht's edge, then looked back at Roman with an expression that made the other man take an unconscious step backward. You're right, Roman. My father was a good soldier. He taught me that the difference between winning and losing isn't superior firepower. It's superior preparation and the willingness to do whatever is necessary to protect your family. As Alexander drove away from the marina, he spoke quietly into his earpiece. All units, this is command. Operation Scorpion is now active. Target designation, Roman Thornton and all associated assets. Rules of engagement, total warfare. No prisoners. Garrett's voice came back immediately. Roger that, boss. What's the primary objective? Alexander looked at his rearview mirror, where the lights of Roman's yacht were disappearing into the darkness. Complete destruction. Financial, personal, and professional. I want him to understand what happens when someone threatens my family. Roman Thornton had just declared war on a man who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of warfare. He was about to learn the difference between a businessman and a warrior. And Alexander Bates intended to make that lesson permanent. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Prey. 3 days after the marina meeting, Roman Thornton's world began to unravel with surgical precision. It started with a phone call from his primary lender, First National Commercial Banking. The voice of his loan officer, previously warm and accommodating, carried an edge of professional concern. Roman, we need to discuss some irregularities in your recent loan applications. There seem to be discrepancies between the property valuations you submitted and our independent assessments. Roman sat in his mahogany-paneled office, watching the city spread out beneath his 42nd floor window. 3 months ago, he'd owned or controlled 17 commercial properties worth a combined $87 million. Today, he was discovering that someone had been very busy undermining the foundation of his empire. What kind of discrepancies? He asked, though a cold certainty was already forming in his stomach. Environmental impact reports that weren't filed with the city. Structural engineering assessments that appear to have been modified. Zoning compliance issues that could affect the legal status of several properties. Roman, if these problems are confirmed, we're looking at potential loan recalls on every property in your portfolio. Roman ended the call and immediately dialed his construction foreman, Clayton Hickman, whom he'd hired 6 months ago to oversee renovations on the Sunset Manor property. Clayton's resume had been impeccable. 15 years of commercial construction experience, references from major developers across 3 states, competitive pricing that had made him the obvious choice for the project. Clayton's voicemail played a cheerful recorded message. You've reached Hickman Construction Services. Due to a family emergency, we'll be temporarily unavailable. All current projects have been suspended pending resolution of some permit issues. Thanks for your understanding. Roman stared at his phone, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. He pulled up Clayton's hiring file on his computer, then cross-referenced the construction company's business license with the state database. Hickman Construction Services had been incorporated exactly 7 months ago. The business address led to a mail drop. The references, when Roman called them, went to numbers that had been disconnected. His assistant, Brittany Ryder, knocked on his office door. "Mr. Thornton? There are some men here from the Environmental Protection Agency. They have a warrant to inspect the Sunset Manor property." Roman's blood turned to ice. The Sunset Manor renovation had been fast-tracked specifically to avoid lengthy environmental assessments. The building was old enough to potentially contain asbestos, lead paint, and other hazardous materials that would require expensive remediation. More importantly, the basement contained several sealed storage areas that Roman had preferred not to have officially inspected. "Tell them I'll be right there." But before he could stand, his computer chimed with an encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Checkmate in 7 moves." "Roman, by now you're beginning to understand that you made an error in judgment. The environmental inspection happening at Sunset Manor will discover hazardous materials that will cost approximately $2.3 million to remediate properly. Your construction contractor, Clayton Hickman, has provided detailed documentation of shortcuts taken during previous renovations, shortcuts that violate federal safety regulations. Your loan applications contained false information, which constitutes bank fraud. The properties you've been using as collateral have structural problems that your inspectors somehow failed to detect. Problems that will be discovered during the re-inspections that began this morning. Alexandra is currently in federal protective custody, providing detailed testimony about your business practices and personal threats made against Dorothy Bates. She's also sharing some interesting information about your methods of acquiring distressed properties for vulnerable elderly clients. You have 48 hours to liquidate your assets and leave the city permanently. The alternative is a federal investigation that will result in criminal charges for bank fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and racketeering. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. AB. Roman read the email 3 times, his hands shaking with a combination of rage and terror. Alexander Bates had somehow managed to infiltrate his business, compromise his assets, and turn his own wife against him in the span of 72 hours. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Alexander's number. "Roman? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Something terrible has happened. Where are you, Alex?" "I'm safe, but Roman," Alexander knows everything. About us, about the property transfers, about your plans for his mother. He's not the man we thought he was. He's dangerous. Really dangerous. Roman's mind raced through the implications. If Alexandra was in federal custody, as the email claimed, then this phone call was likely being recorded. Every word he said could be used as evidence against him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. "Roman, listen to me. You show me photographs, financial records, communications between us that somehow he intercepted. He has enough evidence to destroy both of us. The only way out is to cooperate with the federal investigation." "What investigation?" "Elder fraud, Roman. They're saying you've been systematically targeting elderly property owners, manipulating them into unfavorable transactions, then forcing them into substandard care facilities. They have records going back 3 years. Other families, other victims." Roman felt the walls closing in around him. The systematic targeting of elderly property owners wasn't just his business model. It was his specialty. Seniors who owned valuable real estate but lacked family support systems to protect them from predatory contracts. People like Dorothy Bates, who trusted him because he attended their church, donated to their charities, presented himself as a successful local businessman rather than the predator he actually was. "Alexandra, where are you? We need to meet. We need to figure this out together." "I can't, Roman. They've explained what you really are, what you've been doing to people. I thought you were just a businessman who saw opportunities. I didn't realize you were destroying families." The line went dead. Roman stared out his office window at the city he'd once believed he was conquering. 42 floors below, federal agents were probably already preparing warrants for his arrest. His assets were being systematically compromised by a man who'd somehow managed to infiltrate every aspect of his operation without detection. He opened his safe and removed $500,000 in cash, his emergency fund for situations exactly like this. His passport was in the inner pocket of his suit jacket. His yacht was fueled and ready for international waters. But as he prepared to flee, Roman made one final mistake. Instead of accepting defeat and disappearing, he decided to try to hurt Alexander one last time. He called the number for Sunset Manor and asked to speak with Dorothy Bates. "Mrs. Bates? This is Roman Thornton. I'm calling to let you know that your son has made some very poor decisions recently. Decisions that are going to affect your living situation and your financial security. I want you to know that none of this is your fault." Dorothy's voice was quiet but clear. "Young man, my son is a United States Marine. He survived 3 wars and built a business protecting people from threats they don't even know exist. If you think you can intimidate him or manipulate me, you've severely misunderstood the situation. Mrs. Bates, my son called me an hour ago. He explained exactly who you are and what you've been doing. He also told me that this phone call was being recorded as evidence of witness intimidation and harassment of a federal witness." Roman's blood turned to ice. "You picked the wrong family to prey on, Mr. Thornton. And now you're going to learn what happens when someone threatens a Marine's mother." The line went dead, leaving Roman staring at his phone in the sudden understanding that he'd just provided federal prosecutors with recorded evidence of witness intimidation. Alexander Bates hadn't just outmaneuvered him. He'd psychologically profiled him, predicted his responses, and manipulated him into destroying himself. Roman grabbed his cash and headed for the door. But as the elevator descended toward the parking garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late. 42 floors below, Alexander Bates sat in an unmarked federal vehicle, watching Roman's building through tactical binoculars. "Garrett, confirm that Roman just made contact with my mother." "Confirmed. Full audio recording obtained. Federal prosecutors are very pleased with the evidence of witness intimidation." Alexander lowered his binoculars and smiled for the first time in a week. "Clayton, are you in position at the marina?" "Roger that. The yacht's engines have been disabled. Harbor Patrol is standing by with a federal arrest warrant." "Raphael, status on Alexandra?" "Subject is secure at the federal facility. Full cooperation confirmed. She's provided testimony detailing Roman's entire operation, including the names of 17 other elderly victims." Alexander started his car and pulled out of the parking garage. Phase 1 of his operation was complete. Roman Thornton's business empire was destroyed, his assets were frozen, and his freedom was measured in hours rather than years. But Alexander wasn't finished yet. Roman had made the mistake of threatening his family, manipulating his wife, and attempting to steal everything he'd built. The federal case would ensure Roman spent the next 15 years in prison. But before that happened, Alexander had some personal business to conclude. After all, some lessons could only be taught face to face. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. Roman Thornton's penthouse apartment felt like a tomb as he frantically packed essential documents and cash into a leather briefcase. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights that had once represented his kingdom now looked like the eyes of predators closing in around him. His hands shook as he retrieved backup passports from a hidden safe, documents that would allow him to disappear into international obscurity. Malaysia, perhaps, or the Philippines. Countries where American federal warrants carried less weight and wealthy fugitives could purchase protection. The elevator in his building hummed with its familiar mechanical rhythm. But tonight the sound carried an ominous undertone. Roman counted the floors: 38, 39, 40. The penthouse occupied the 41st floor. No one should be coming up this late, unless... The elevator stopped. The mechanical humming died. Roman drew the .38 revolver he kept in his desk drawer and moved toward the apartment's front door. The hallway outside was silent, but he could sense a presence, the weight of someone waiting, watching, His phone buzzed with a text message. "Open the door, Roman. We need to finish our conversation." Roman's finger tightened on the trigger. "Alexander, I'm alone, Roman. No federal agents, no backup. Just you and me, the way it should have been from the beginning." Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Roman unlocked the door and pulled it open. Alexander Bates stood in the hallway, wearing dark jeans and a black tactical jacket. His hands were empty, but Roman could see the slight bulge of concealed weapons beneath his clothing. "Come in," Roman said, stepping back while keeping his revolver trained on Alexander's chest. Alexander entered the apartment with the fluid movement of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. His eyes swept the room in a tactical assessment, noting exit points, potential weapons, defensive positions. "Nice place," Alexander said conversationally. 41st floor, panoramic city views, probably worth $3.5 million. Too bad it's going to be seized as evidence in your federal case. Roman kept his weapon trained on Alexander, but found his hands continuing to shake. "What do you want?" "I want to understand something, Roman. Help me work through the psychology of a man who preys on elderly people. Someone who sees a war veteran's mother and thinks, perfect victim for my real estate scam. It's not personal, Alexander. It's business. You made it personal when you threatened my mother. You made it personal when you corrupted my wife. You made it personal when you decided to destroy my family." Roman backed toward his bedroom, where another gun was hidden in the nightstand. "Your wife came to me willingly. Your mother is going to need professional care, whether you admit it or not. I offered solutions to real problems. You offered exploitation disguised as solutions. There's a difference." Alexander moved closer, and Roman suddenly understood why trained soldiers had followed this man into combat. There was something in his eyes, a cold, calculating intelligence that seemed to anticipate every possible response, every potential escape route. "The federal case will put you away for 15 years, Alexander continued. "Elder fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. You'll be 67 when you get out, assuming you survive federal prison. Men who prey on the elderly don't typically do well in that environment. What's your point?" "My point is that 15 years isn't enough. You threatened my mother, Roman. You made her feel helpless and afraid in what should have been the safest place in her world. That's not something I can forgive." Roman reached the bedroom doorway and lunged for the nightstand. His fingers closed around the grip of a 9mm pistol just as Alexander's voice cut through the darkness. "I wouldn't." Roman spun around to find Alexander standing 10 feet away, completely relaxed, his hands still empty. "You're not a killer, Roman. You're a predator, but you're not a killer. There's a difference. You don't know what I'm capable of. Actually, I do. I've spent the last week studying everything about you. Your military records. Oh, wait, you don't have any. Your psychological profile, based on victim statements. Your business methodology. You're a coward who targets the vulnerable because you're afraid of anyone who might fight back." Roman raised the 9mm, his hands shaking so violently he could barely aim. "Stay back. Roman, look at your hands. Look at how you're holding that weapon. You're going to hurt yourself before you hurt me." And Roman realized with dawning horror that Alexander was right. The gun felt foreign in his hands, heavy and unwieldy. He'd never fired it outside of a shooting range, never pointed it at another human being. "The difference between us," Alexander said, stepping closer, "is that I've killed people who threaten my family. I've done it with rifles, with knives, with my bare hands. I've done it in deserts and mountains and urban environments. And I've never lost a moment's sleep over it, because every person I killed was trying to hurt someone I was sworn to protect." Roman's finger tightened on the trigger, but his hands were shaking too violently to maintain aim. "You want to shoot me, Roman? Go ahead. But understand that if you miss, and you will miss, I'm going to take that gun away from you and use it to teach you what happens when someone threatens my mother." The psychological pressure was overwhelming. Roman could feel his resolve crumbling under the weight of Alexander's absolute certainty. This wasn't a negotiation or a standoff. It was a predator being cornered by an apex predator. "What do you want?" Roman whispered. "I want you to understand something before the federal agents arrive. My mother is 83 years old. She raised me alone after my father died in Vietnam. She worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She's the strongest, most courageous person I've ever known. And you made her feel helpless. Alexander was close enough now that Roman could see the scars on his hands, the faded tan lines from years of military deployment, the absolutely calm expression of a man who'd faced death so many times it no longer frightened him. For that, Alexander continued, you're going to spend the next 15 years thinking about this conversation every single day. You're going to remember the moment you realized you weren't the predator anymore. You were the prey. Roman's grip on the gun was slipping. Sweat made the metal slick, and his hands were shaking so violently he could no longer maintain control. Drop the weapon, Roman. The gun clattered to the floor. Alexander kicked it away and pulled out his phone. Federal agents, 41st floor. Subject is in custody. As sirens wailed in the distance, Roman collapsed into a chair, the full weight of his situation finally crushing down on him. His empire was gone. His freedom was gone. His identity as a successful predator was gone. One more thing, Roman, Alexander said as federal agents pounded on the apartment door. My wife has provided testimony detailing every aspect of your relationship. Every lie you told her about me. Every promise you made about stealing my assets. Every plan you made to destroy my family. She's also agreed to testify against you in exchange for immunity. She betrayed me? Alexander smiled, the cold, predatory smile of a man who just won a war. No, Roman. She chose survival over loyalty to a man who was planning to betray her the moment it became convenient. Just like you would have done to her. The apartment door burst open, flooding the room with federal agents in tactical gear. Roman Thornton, who had spent 3 years systematically destroying families and stealing from the elderly, was finally facing the consequences of his choices. But as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Roman realized that the legal consequences were just the beginning. Alexander Bates had done something far more devastating than simply having him arrested. He'd exposed him as exactly what he was, a coward who preyed on the helpless because he was too weak to face someone who could fight back. And that realization would follow Roman Thornton for every day of the 15 years he was about to spend in federal prison. Chapter 6, Collateral Damage. 6 weeks after Roman Thornton's arrest, Alexander Bradshaw Bates sat in the conference room of Hoffman, Klein & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious divorce law firms. Across the polished mahogany table, her husband studied legal documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan military operations. Alexandra had aged 10 years in the past month and a half. The stress of federal testimony, the collapse of her affair, and the dawning realization of what she'd become had carved new lines around her eyes and mouth. Her hands shook slightly as she signed document after document, each one stripping away another piece of the life she tried to steal. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear, said Alexander's attorney, Perry Martin, a sharp-eyed man who specialized in protecting the assets of high-net-worth individuals. Mrs. Bates is entitled to her personal possessions, her vehicle, and $50,000 in liquid assets. All real property, business interests, and investment accounts remain with Mr. Bates. Alexander's lawyer, a well-meaning public defender named Hope Phillips, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This seems somewhat inequitable, given the 23-year duration of the marriage. The prenuptial agreement specifically voids spousal support in cases of adultery. Perry continued smoothly. Mrs. Bates has admitted to a sexual relationship with Roman Thornton while still married to my client. The agreement is ironclad. Alexandra finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander, we need to talk. Privately. Alexander looked up from the documents, his expression neutral. Anything you need to say can be said in front of our attorneys. Please. 5 minutes. Perry Martin shook his head. I strongly advise against. 5 minutes, Alexander said. The attorneys left the conference room, leaving the couple alone for the first time since Roman's arrest. Alexandra studied her husband's face, searching for some trace of the man she'd married, the man who'd once promised to love and protect her for the rest of their lives. Alex, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you, betrayed your trust, participated in something that threatened your mother. But we can work through this. We can rebuild. No. The word was delivered with absolute finality. 23 years, Alex. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Alexander leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly in front of him. It meant everything to me, Alexandra. 23 years of building a life together, creating something meaningful, supporting each other through challenges. It meant so much to me that I never once considered being unfaithful, never once questioned my commitment to our marriage, never once looked at another woman and thought about betraying everything we built together. Alexandra felt tears building behind her eyes. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are forgetting anniversaries or leaving dishes in the sink. What you did was systematic betrayal over months. You chose to sleep with another man in our bed. You chose to help him plan the destruction of my family. You chose to participate in threatening my mother. I didn't know what Roman was really doing. You knew enough. You knew he was planning to steal my assets. You knew he was manipulating elderly people. You knew he was threatening my mother's security. And you participated because you thought it would benefit you financially. The tears came now, streaming down Alexandra's face. I was lonely, Alex. You were always working, always traveling for business. I felt like I was married to a ghost. So you decided to become one. Alexandra stared at him through her tears. What does that mean? It means that the woman I married, the woman I loved, died the moment you chose to betray our family. What's sitting across from me now is just the ghost of that person. Try to convince me that murder victims sometimes deserve what happened to them. The brutal honesty of his words hit Alexandra like a physical blow. She'd spent weeks in federal custody, providing testimony against Roman, telling herself that her cooperation would somehow redeem her choices. But sitting across from Alexander now, she realized that redemption wasn't possible. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. What happens to me now? She whispered. You live with the consequences of your choices. You find an apartment you can afford on $50,000. You find a job that doesn't require security clearance, since your association with Roman will disqualify you from most professional positions. You build a new life based on who you've chosen to become. And us. There is no us. There hasn't been an us since the first time you slept with Roman Thornton. Alexandra wiped her eyes with a tissue from the conference table. Do you hate me? Alexander considered the question with the same careful analysis he brought to all important decisions. No, hate requires emotional investment, and I've learned not to invest emotions in people who've proven themselves unworthy of trust. That's worse than hate. Yes, it is. The attorneys returned to find Alexandra signing the final divorce documents. The marriage that had lasted 23 years was legally dissolved in less than an hour, leaving her with a small settlement and the knowledge that she destroyed the most important relationship in her life for a man who'd been using her as a pawn in his criminal enterprise. As they left the law firm, Alexandra tried one final appeal. Alex, your mother, she's been asking about me. She's confused about why I haven't visited. Could I say goodbye to her? Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a shadow of the compassion he'd once felt for her. My mother doesn't understand that you helped threaten her security. In her mind, you're still her daughter-in-law, someone she trusted and cared about. I'm not going to destroy that trust by explaining what you really are. Then can I? No. You forfeited the right to be part of my family when you chose to participate in threatening my family. That door is closed, Alexandra. Permanently. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the afternoon crowd of professionals and tourists that filled the city's financial district. Alexander Bates had systematically dismantled Roman Thornton's criminal enterprise, protected his mother from further threats, and eliminated every trace of betrayal from his life. Alexandra stood on the sidewalk, holding a check for $50,000 and realizing it was all she had left of a life she'd spent 46 years building. No husband, no family, no professional reputation, no social connections that hadn't been compromised by her association with a convicted criminal. 6 blocks away, Alexander sat in his car, watching his ex-wife through the rearview mirror. She looked lost, broken, like someone who just realized the full cost of her choices. For a moment, he felt something that might have been pity. Then he thought about his mother's voice when she'd called him that night, scared and confused, betrayed by people she'd trusted. He thought about Roman Thornton's laugh when he'd said Alexander wouldn't come for his family. The pity disappeared, replaced by the cold satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Alexander started his car and drove toward Sunset Manor, where his mother was waiting for their weekly dinner. She'd moved into a beautiful senior community that specialized in early-stage dementia care, a place where she felt safe, respected, and valued. Some people deserved protection. Others deserved the consequences of their choices. Alexander had learned long ago to tell the difference. Chapter 7. New Foundations. 8 months after Roman Thornton's conviction, Alexander Bates stood in the garden of Meadowbrook Senior Living, watching his mother tend to a small vegetable plot she'd claimed as her personal project. At 83, Dorothy Bates had found new purpose in the specialized care community Alexander had chosen for her, a place where her early-stage dementia was treated as a medical condition rather than a character flaw. "The tomatoes are coming along nicely," she said, brushing soil from her hands. "Though I can't remember if I planted them last week or last month. They look perfect, Mom." Dorothy studied her son's face with the sharp intelligence that still flickered through her medical condition. "You're different lately. Calmer. Like you've settled something that was bothering you." Alexander helped her to a garden bench overlooking the facility's lake. Meadowbrook was expensive, nearly $8,000 per month, but it provided the kind of dignified, professional care that honored his mother's independence while ensuring her safety. "I've made some changes in my business," he said. "Fewer international contracts, more time at home." And Alexandra? This was the difficult part. Dorothy's dementia created gaps in her memory that sometimes preserved painful truths and sometimes mercifully obscured them. She remembered Alexander's wedding day, but had forgotten the divorce proceedings. She remembered loving Alexandra like a daughter, but couldn't quite recall why Alexandra no longer visited. "Alexandra and I decided we wanted different things," Alexander said carefully. "She's building a new life for herself." Dorothy nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human complexity. Sometimes people grow in different directions. It's sad, but it's not always anyone's fault. Alexander didn't correct her. Let his mother believe their marriage had ended through natural incompatibility rather than betrayal and criminal conspiracy. She deserved whatever peace or condition could provide. His phone buzzed with a text from Garrett Whitehead. "Thornton parole hearing scheduled for 2031. Full 15-year sentence confirmed. No early release." Alexander deleted the message without responding. Roman Thornton was a closed chapter, filed away in the same mental compartment where he stored all defeated enemies. The man would spend the next 12 years in federal prison, and when he emerged, he'd find a world that had moved on without him. "Are you lonely?" Dorothy asked. The question caught Alexander off guard. "I have my work, my team, my responsibility to you." "That's not what I asked." Alexander considered the question seriously. Since the divorce, he'd thrown himself into rebuilding his business and expanding into new markets. Bates Strategic Solutions now employed 47 people and maintained offices in 6 countries. He'd acquired Roman's former properties at bankruptcy auctions and converted them into transitional housing for veterans dealing with PTSD and addiction. But loneliness? The concept felt foreign to him now, like a language he'd once spoken fluently but had forgotten through disuse. "I'm content, Mom. I have purpose, meaningful work, people who depend on me. That's enough." Dorothy reached over and patted his hand. "Your father used to say the same thing, right up until the day he met me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching other residents tend their gardens and participate in afternoon activities. Meadowbrook represented everything Alexander valued: dignity, competence, loyalty, protection of the vulnerable. It was the opposite of everything Roman Thornton had stood for. Mr. Bates? Alexander turned to find Dr. Lydia Rutherford, Meadowbrook's Director of Psychological Services, approaching with a warm smile. She was perhaps 45, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of genuine compassion that couldn't be faked. Dr. Rutherford, how's Mom doing with the new medication adjustments? Very well. Her cognitive function has stabilized, and she's become one of our most active residents. She's actually been helping other families adjust to the realities of memory care. She has a gift for making people feel less afraid. Alexander watched his mother pointing out different flowers to another resident, explaining their care requirements with the patience of someone who'd spent decades nurturing growing things. She's always been good at helping people, he said. Dr. Rutherford studied Alexander with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read human psychology. Your mother talks about you constantly. How proud she is of your military service, your business success, your dedication to her care. But she worries that you're isolating yourself. I'm not isolated. I have extensive professional and social connections. Professional connections aren't the same as personal relationships. Alexander felt the familiar defensive barriers rising. Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but my personal life is none of my business. You're absolutely right. Dr. Rutherford smiled. But your mother asked me to talk to you. She's concerned that you're so focused on taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten to take care of yourself. That evening, Alexander sat in his study, reviewing quarterly reports and planning the expansion of his veteran housing program. The work was meaningful, profitable, and aligned with his values. It was also, he realized, a way of staying busy enough to avoid thinking about the emptiness that had replaced his marriage. He pulled up a secure file on his computer, the complete dossier on Roman Thornton's conviction and sentencing. Federal prosecutors had ultimately charged him with elder fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and witness intimidation. The case had uncovered 17 other elderly victims across 3 states, resulting in additional charges that ensured Roman would never again be in a position to hurt vulnerable people. Justice had been served. His mother was safe. His business was thriving. His ex-wife was learning to live with the consequences of her choices. So why did victory feel so hollow? His phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number. Alexander? It's Eric Moran. Eric was a former teammate from his force reconnaissance days, now running security operations for multinational corporations in Southeast Asia. Eric, good to hear from you. How's Singapore treating you? Can't complain. Listen, I'm calling with an opportunity. Major contract protecting a technology executive and his family. 6-month assignment, excellent pay, and the kind of challenge that might remind you why you got into this business in the first place. Alexander considered the offer. 6 months in Singapore would mean leaving his mother, abandoning his veteran housing project, walking away from a life he'd rebuilt after the divorce. Thanks for thinking of me, but I have commitments here. Alex, when's the last time you took a vacation? When's the last time you did something for yourself instead of for your business, or your mother, or your sense of duty? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I'll think about it, Alexander said finally. After ending the call, he walked through his house, a sprawling property that had once felt like a home, but now felt like a museum of a marriage that no longer existed. Alexandra's absence was everywhere. In the empty spaces where her books had been, in the kitchen that no longer smelled like her cooking, in the silence that had replaced her laughter. He'd won his war against Roman Thornton. He'd protected his family and preserved his assets. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. But victory, Alexander realized, was a cold companion for a man who'd forgotten how to trust, how to love, how to believe in anything beyond duty and revenge. Tomorrow, he would visit his mother again. He would review his business reports and plan new expansions. He would continue building the walls that protected him from ever being betrayed again. But tonight, for the first time in months, Alexander Bates allowed himself to wonder what his life might have been like if he'd chosen to rebuild rather than simply survive. Chapter 8. Unexpected Alliances. Dr. Lydia Rutherford found Alexander in Meadowbrook's workshop 3 weeks later, helping his mother refinish an antique rocking chair she'd discovered in the facility's donation room. His hands moved with practiced precision, sanding away decades of wear to reveal the original wood underneath. "Your mother tells me you built most of the furniture in your childhood home," Dr. Rutherford said, settling into a nearby chair. "My father taught me before he deployed to Vietnam. Said a man should know how to create things, not just destroy them." Dorothy looked up from the chair's armrest. "Alex built my entire kitchen when he came back from Afghanistan. Beautiful cabinets, perfect joints, everything measured to the inch." Alexander smiled at the memory. "You complained that the counters were too high. I was wrong. They were perfect for someone your height. I should have let you build them for yourself, not for someone my size." Dr. Rutherford watched the interaction with professional interest. The relationship between Alexander and his mother was clearly the emotional center of his life, possibly the only relationship where he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "Alexander, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped onto the workshop's covered porch, overlooking Meadowbrook's gardens. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across carefully maintained flower beds and walking paths. "Your mother's condition is progressing more slowly than we initially projected," Dr. Rutherford said. "The combination of medication, cognitive therapy, and social engagement is helping preserve her mental function. She could have several more years of meaningful independence." "That's good news." "It is. But it also means you need to start thinking about your own long-term plans. Right now, your entire life revolves around her care and your business obligations. What happens when she no longer needs daily support? What happens when your business runs itself?" Alexander studied the gardens, noting the strategic placement of security cameras and emergency call stations. Even in this sanctuary, he couldn't stop thinking like a protector. "I haven't considered that scenario." "Maybe you should. Your mother is concerned that you're using her medical condition as an excuse to avoid rebuilding your personal life." The accusation stung because it carried the weight of truth. Alexander had indeed organized his entire existence around duty, responsibility, and protection, anything that allowed him to avoid the risk of being betrayed again. "Dr. Rutherford, with respect, my personal choices affect your mother's emotional well-being. She feels responsible for your isolation. She's afraid that caring for her is preventing you from finding happiness." Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert from his business security system. Someone was attempting to access his home office remotely. "Excuse me." Alexander stepped away and called Garrett Whitehead. "Talk to me. We've got attempted intrusion on your home network. Sophisticated attack, targeting your personal files rather than business data. I'm running traces now, but whoever this is knows what they're doing." "How sophisticated?" "Government level. This isn't some random hacker looking for financial information. Someone with serious resources is specifically targeting you." Alexander's mind immediately went to potential enemies, former targets from his military days, competitors in the private security industry, associates of Roman Thornton seeking revenge. The list was longer than he cared to admit. "Lock down everything. Full security protocols on all properties. And Garrett, run a complete background check on everyone who's had access to my personal information in the last 6 months." As he ended the call, Dr. Rutherford approached with an expression of concern. "Problems. Work-related. Nothing serious." But Alexander was already shifting into combat mode, his mind cataloging potential threats and defensive strategies. The peaceful afternoon at Meadowbrook suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Dr. Rutherford said quietly. "What?" "You just received a phone call that clearly disturbed you, and your first instinct is to withdraw, to start planning defenses against enemies who may not even exist. When was the last time you trusted someone enough to ask for help?" Alexander started to dismiss the question, then stopped. When had he last trusted anyone? His team was loyal, but their relationship was professional. His mother loved him, but her condition made her dependent rather than supportive. Since the divorce, he'd systematically eliminated every relationship that required emotional vulnerability. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford," he said finally. "Trust is a necessity you've convinced yourself you don't deserve." Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number that made his blood run cold. Alexander Bates, speaking. Mr. Bates, this is Federal Agent Victor Kendall, Cybercrime Division. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, Alexander sat in Meadowbrook's private conference room with Agent Kendall, an intense man in his 40s who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with high-level security threats. The cyber attack on your personal network originated from a server farm in Eastern Europe, Kendall explained. Same digital fingerprints as attacks on 3 other private security executives in the past month. We believe someone is systematically targeting industry leaders, looking for vulnerabilities in their operations. Corporate espionage? Possibly. Or someone preparing for a coordinated strike against multiple firms. Your company provides security for some very high-profile clients, government officials, Fortune 500 executives, foreign dignitaries. Access to your client files could be extremely valuable to the wrong people. Alexander leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. What do you need from me? Full cooperation with our investigation. Complete access to your security logs, client databases, and personnel files. And Agent Kendall hesitated. We'd like you to consider allowing us to use your system as bait. Let the attackers think they've succeeded, then trace them back to their source. That would put my clients at risk. We'd implement safeguards, false data, isolated networks, multiple redundancies. Your real client information would be completely protected. Alexander studied the federal agent's face, reading the micro-expressions that revealed stress, urgency, and something else, fear. There's something you're not telling me. Agent Kendall glanced around the conference room, then lowered his voice. 3 weeks ago, a private security executive in Dallas was murdered in his home. Last week, another one in Phoenix. Both were targeted after cyber attacks similar to the one on your system. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. This wasn't corporate espionage. It was systematic assassination of people in his profession. Who's behind it? We don't know yet. But whoever they are, they have serious resources and a very specific agenda. And based on the pattern, you're likely their next target. Alexander felt the familiar calm that came with confirmed enemy contact. After months of dealing with emotional uncertainty, having a clear threat to fight felt almost like relief. What's your timeline for the bait operation? 72 hours. We need to move fast before they realize we're onto them. As Agent Kendall left, Alexander remained in the conference room, staring out at the peaceful gardens where his mother was still working on a rocking chair. She looked happy, content, safe in her protected environment. If someone was hunting private security executives, everyone Alexander cared about was potentially at risk. His mother, his team, his clients, everyone whose safety depended on his ability to stay alive and operational. Dr. Rutherford knocked on the conference room door. Is everything all right? Alexander looked at her, weighing how much truth he could share without creating panic. I may need to travel for business in the next few days. Could you keep an eye on my mother? Make sure she's not worried about my absence. Of course. But Alexander, Dr. Rutherford stepped into the room and closed the door. Whatever's happening, you don't have to face it alone. There are people who care about you, who want to help. For a moment, Alexander allowed himself to believe that might be true. Then his phone buzzed with another security alert, and a moment passed. Some battles, he knew, could only be fought by those who'd already lost everything they were afraid to lose. Chapter 9. The Final Stand. The trap was set with military precision. Alexander's home office had been transformed into a digital honeypot, complete with false client databases, fake security protocols, and carefully placed vulnerabilities that would allow cybercriminals to believe they'd successfully penetrated his network. Agent Kendall and his team monitored the operation from a command center established in Alexander's basement, while Alexander himself maintained normal routines to avoid arousing suspicion. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, the bait was taken. Contact, whispered Agent Raphael Merritt, monitoring network activity from his position in the surveillance van. Multiple intrusion points, sophisticated protocols. These guys are good. Alexander sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the digital battle unfold on his laptop screen. Lines of code scrolled past as the attackers methodically harvested what they believed was sensitive client information, including detailed security arrangements for a fictional technology executive scheduled to visit the city next week. "Trace is active," reported Agent Kendall. "Signal is bouncing through 7 different countries, but we're following the breadcrumbs. Give us 12 more minutes." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Alexander found himself thinking about his mother, safely asleep in her room at Meadowbrook, unaware that her son was serving as bait for killers who'd already murdered 2 of his professional colleagues. At 4:03 a.m., Agent Kendall's voice crackled through the radio. "Trace complete. Source location confirmed. Warehouse complex in the industrial district, 12 miles northeast of your position. Multiple heat signatures, electronic surveillance equipment, and a pause. Boss, we've got a problem. Talk to me. Vehicle moving fast toward your neighborhood. 2 additional cars providing escort. ETA, approximately 8 minutes." Alexander felt the familiar calm of confirmed enemy contact. "They're coming here. Looks like it. They must have detected our trace and decided to eliminate the threat directly." Alexander moved to his bedroom and opened the tactical weapons safe hidden behind a false panel. Body armor, night vision goggles, assault rifle, sidearm, flashbang grenades, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. He'd hoped never to need this equipment again, but some skills were permanent. "Kendall, I need you and your team to fall back to a safe distance. This is about to become a combat situation." "Negative. We have federal jurisdiction and tactical support en route. You have maybe 6 minutes before trained killers arrive at my location. Your people aren't equipped for this kind of fight." Alexander stripped out of his civilian clothes and in a tactical gear with practiced efficiency. Black BDUs, ceramic body armor, communication headset, weapons harness. The transformation was complete in less than 90 seconds. "Alexander, this is Agent Kendall. Stand down and wait for backup. That's a direct order." "Agent Kendall, with respect, you don't have authority to give me orders. And if I wait for backup, we'll lose the only chance to capture these people alive." Alexander moved through his house, activating defensive systems he'd hoped never to use. Reinforced door locks, window barriers, motion sensors, automated lighting controls. His home had been designed as both sanctuary and fortress. At 4:09 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into his neighborhood and deployed 12 armed figures dressed in military-style tactical gear. Alexander watched them through his security cameras, noting their formation, weapons, and movement patterns. Professional, experienced, dangerous, but not as dangerous as a force reconnaissance Marine defending his home. Alexander activated his communication system. "Unknown tactical team, this is Alexander Bates. You are trespassing on private property and in violation of multiple federal laws. Stand down and identify yourselves." The response came in the form of automatic weapons fire that shattered his front windows and punched holes through his exterior walls. Alexander smiled grimly and activated his home's defensive lighting system. Suddenly, his entire property was illuminated by high-intensity floodlights that turned night into day and eliminated every shadow the attackers might use for concealment. Then he began to fight back. The first attacker breached Alexander's front door and walked into a crossfire that dropped him before he could raise his weapon. The second and third tried to coordinate their entry through the kitchen and were stopped by precisely placed rifle fire that demonstrated why force reconnaissance operators were considered the elite of the elite. Contact front. Contact front. We have a military-trained defender." Alexander heard the radio chatter through his surveillance system and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. These killers had murdered his colleagues through surprise and overwhelming force. Tonight, they were facing someone who'd fought in places where survival meant being better, faster, and more ruthless than everyone trying to kill you. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When federal tactical teams finally arrived, they found 12 attackers neutralized, Alexander Bates sitting calmly on his front porch in full tactical gear, and enough evidence to unravel an international conspiracy targeting private security executives. Agent Kendall approached with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Jesus, Alexander. It looks like a war zone. It was a war zone. These people came here to kill me. I responded accordingly. Any injuries? Alexander checked his watch. 4:31 a.m. None that matter. What did you find? Electronic equipment, communications gear, and financial records linking this operation to a Russian organized crime syndicate. They've been systematically eliminating private security executives who've provided protection for government officials and technology leaders. Your name was on a target list with 15 other executives. Alexander removed his helmet and body armor, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened. And the other executives? We're moving protective details to their locations now. Thanks to tonight's operation, we can roll up the entire network. As dawn broke over the residential neighborhood, Alexander surveyed the damage to his home and realized that his old life was truly over. The house where he'd lived with Alexandra, where he'd tried to build a normal existence, was now a crime scene that would never feel safe again. His phone rang. Dr. Rutherford's voice was tense with concern. Alexander, are you all right? The news is reporting some kind of incident at your address. I'm fine. Minor security issue, nothing serious. Don't lie to me. I can hear sirens in the background. Alexander looked at the federal agents processing evidence, the news crews setting up across the street, the neighbors who'd emerged to stare at the aftermath of urban warfare. Dr. Rutherford, could you make sure my mother doesn't see the news reports? I'll be there later today to explain everything. Of course. But Alexander, when you come, we need to talk. About everything. 8 hours later, Alexander sat in Meadowbrook's garden with his mother and Dr. Rutherford, trying to explain why federal agents were providing security details for their facility. Someone was angry about your work? Dorothy asked, her dementia creating merciful gaps in her ability to process the full implications of what had happened. Something like that, Mom. But it's over now. The bad people have been caught. Dorothy patted his hand with the infinite patience of someone who'd spent decades loving a warrior. I'm proud of you, Alex. Your father will be proud, too. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. That afternoon, Dr. Rutherford found Alexander in the workshop, methodically sanding the rocking chair his mother had been refinishing. The news reports are calling you a hero, she said. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who fought back when cornered. There's a difference. Alexander considered the question. Heroes save people. I eliminate threats. There's a distinction. Dr. Rutherford sat down beside him, watching his hands move with practiced precision across the wood grain. What happens now? I rebuild. Again. New house, enhanced security, probably a different city. My business will survive, but I'll need to restructure everything. That's not what I meant. Alexander paused in his sanding. What did you mean? I meant what happens to you personally. Do you keep building walls to protect yourself from a world that might hurt you? Do you keep convincing yourself that isolation is strength? Do you spend the rest of your life fighting battles that might not need to be fought? The questions hung in the air like challenges. Dr. Rutherford, my life experiences have taught me that trust is a luxury that gets people killed. Emotional vulnerability is a weakness that enemies exploit. The safest way to protect the people I care about is to maintain professional distance from everyone else. And how's that working for you? Alexander looked through the workshop windows at his mother, who was helping another resident plant flowers in the communal garden. She looked happy, purposeful, surrounded by people who valued her wisdom and kindness. It's kept everyone I care about alive and safe. But has it made anyone happy? Including you. For the first time in months, Alexander allowed himself to consider the question seriously. Victory over Roman Thornton had fell hollow. Success in his business felt mechanical. Even tonight's tactical triumph felt like just another confirmation that he was effective at destroying things. Happiness isn't the priority, he said finally. Maybe it should be. Dr. Rutherford stood to leave, then paused at the workshop door. Alexander, your mother asked me to give you something. She handed him a small wrapped package. Inside was a photograph, Alexander and Alexandra on their wedding day, both of them young and radiantly happy, surrounded by family and friends who believed in forever. On the back, His mother had written in her careful handwriting, "Some chances only come once. Some chances come twice. The wise man knows the difference. Love, Mom." Alexander stared at the photograph for a long time, remembering what it felt like to believe in tomorrow, to trust in promises, to build something with someone instead of just defending against everyone. That night, as federal agents maintained security around Meadowbrook, and his mother slept peacefully in her protected room, Alexander Bates sat in the garden and made a decision. He would rebuild his life. But this time, he would build something worth defending instead of just defending what he had left. The war was over. It was time to learn how to live in peacetime, even if he'd forgotten how. Epilogue. 2 years later, Alexander Bates stood in the same garden where he'd made his decision to rebuild. Meadowbrook had expanded to include a new wing specifically designed for families of veterans dealing with PTSD and trauma recovery. The funding had come from the sale of Roman Thornton's confiscated assets, which Alexander had donated to create therapeutic programs for people learning to trust again. His mother's condition had stabilized, allowing her to maintain independence while receiving the support she needed. She spent her days teaching woodworking in the expanded workshop and counseling other families navigating the complexities of memory care. Dr. Rutherford had become more than his mother's therapist. She'd become a friend who challenged Alexander to consider that healing was possible, that walls built for protection could eventually become prisons. Alexander's business had evolved too. Bates Strategic Solutions now specialized in protecting families rather than just high-profile executives. His team had expanded to include therapists, social workers, and counselors who understood that true security meant helping people rebuild their lives, not just defending their assets. Roman Thornton remained in federal prison, where he would stay for another decade. Alexandra had moved to another state, where she worked as a receptionist and lived quietly with the consequences of her choices. Alexander no longer checked on her progress, not out of cruelty, but because moving forward meant letting go of the past. The old Alexander would have called this story a victory. The new Alexander was learning to call it a beginning. Some wars ended with total victory. Others ended with the wisdom to stop fighting battles that could never truly be won. Alexander Bates had finally learned the difference.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.